to report, and that the workers usually contact the reporter to understand their concerns. Okay, cool. My point is you can't tolerate. You can't tolerate as opposed to tolerate. I'm just was using the opportunity of your response to implicate how tolerate could be problematic. So Barbara says, so do I. Something informed consent. Discuss the issue with a caveat that reporting can be processed as part of a therapy. Yeah, that's right. And that you can go to bat for your clients with protective services. And they could need to know that, although you can't promise them anything because it's an independent process. Colleen's back and she says, I don't want CPS's job. And it sounds like the therapist would be crossing boundaries of care if we tried to put a Band-Aid on it and move on. Yeah, a little bit easier, quote unquote easier, because Tarasov too said the therapist has to make a discretionary decision of who to tell and how to protect, rather than just the flat-out duty to warn alone. So the duty to warn the victim is one answer, but Tarasov too added a couple of other answers, which included telling the police or taking reasonable steps to protect against this happening. Now, one of you, and I forgot your name, forgive me, had indicated that many ways, the best way to handle this is to make your client directly call the intended victim and have this warning be made directly by the client to the victim. And that in that way you satisfy the rule that the victim can be warned, and then you're taking reasonable steps, arguably, to try and prevent the harm, because number one, the victim can take steps to protect herself, and number two, further, the alleged victim feels your client's retaliation, their public humiliation, and indirectly her exposure to adverse financial consequences. You recognize all these signs of battered spouse syndrome by the judge toward his spouse. Your fear is that if you were to report the abuse, it would incite further abuse, certainly emotional problems, and generally make matters worse. Now, this shouldn't surprise you. It seems like a century ago, when I started with you, that I raised a hypothetical like this. You all were so smart and said, no discretion, you'd have to report. It's not child abuse, by the way, but you'd have to report harm to the elderly, to the spouse, and you would involve them in trouble. But they're in trouble, and now this thing has to be dealt with. So this with issues of, are you acting in a discretionary way, or are you acting in a non-discretionary way? And so, depending on what state you're in, you have what's called the test of discretion. Some states ask for a reasonable person test. That means if you're thinking about this from the point of view of a reasonable person, and a reasonable person would turn to you and say, I have to report, then you'd report. So just take Courtney's question. I have a 13-year-old babysitter, not a 14-year-old. The law says you need a 14-year-old. What would a reasonable person say? So take your best friend, who you regard as a reasonable person, ask that person, and not a professional in the field, and see what they would say. And if they say, you know, you probably should report it anyway, even though you don't have the 14, and let the investigation figure